Hey, what's up? Thanks for tuning in. I have no notes today. I'm just going to go off the top because I missed last week's recording. This week's recording has run into a couple of bumps. So I just went through some topics that I wanted to talk about in other places, and we're going to talk about one of them here, and that is going to be demon theory. So lots of people have a visceral reaction when they hear the word demon. And why is that? Well, demon has a sort of religious connotation, but really what a demon is has nothing to do with Christianity, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, or any other kind of religion. Has nothing to do with Socrates and his daemon or anything like that. What a demon is, in the way that we are going to be talking about it today, is an entity that lives in a finer dimension, higher or lower, you could say, based on the density of thought or density of immaterial matter, and sustains itself off of energies that it cannot generate itself, but perhaps can influence the generation of. See, human beings generate a kind of energy when we feel emotional. When you get a rise out of somebody, they're letting their energy out. It's similar to the kind of energy that somebody releases when they have an orgasm. This is commonly known as loosh. My first experience or my first exposure to loosh came from Tom Montauk on montalk.net. That's montalk.net. Great website, wealth of information there. Of course, as with anything, as with listening to me or any other weirdo speak on these things on the internet, you want to take it with a grain of salt and look for the way that these things are expressed in the world. Now, before we get into talking grossly about demons and what they do, we need to understand thought forming. There is a concept in Tibetan Buddhism called tulpa. Now, when we talk about Tibetan Buddhism, we need to realize that Tibetan Buddhism comes from the old indigenous Tibetan religion called Bon. And as with most religions in that part of the world, they are heavily influenced by Mongolian shamanism. Mongolian shamanism is something that, look it up. There are these there are these people called the Bu Morgul who they let a spirit into their body and they eat fire so that they can give information to the people who are invoking them. But when we talk about a tulpa, we're talking about it's almost like a program that works in the mental sphere, right? We talked about before, especially on the Instagram page, we've talked about before how every thought that you have exists in a single place. The body that you actively interact with the world of thought with is your mind, right? Your mind is a body. Your mind has tendencies. Your mind has places where it is strong, weak, flexible, not flexible. Your mind has places where it is malleable and not malleable, different than flexible. And you use it in different ways, just like we use our bodies. So when I talk about the mental plane, when I talk about something like the astral plane is a little bit more symbolic, and when you experience it in your dreams, you experience it symbolically leveraged against your experience in the physical. So the mental plane is a little bit different because the mental plane has everything to do with thought aggregates, thought forms, egregores, and things like that. So what a tulpa is, what a thought form is a program that somebody intentionally creates by focusing thought on a singular action or something that they might need help with, or maybe protecting a space or something like that. Now, I need to express that we all create tulpas, but although, okay, a tulpa itself is what happens when the thought form gains enough energy to become conscious, right? Or maybe not conscious, but more autonomous. It doesn't need to be used. So a lighter example of this is when I was working in manufacturing, I learned to drive a forklift. I drove that forklift, same forklift, every single day for months, a year almost, and I got really good at driving it. I would lock in and I would just go to work. I'd never had that strong work ethic in my life than when I was sitting on that machine. I got a different machine at the job. They gave me a different machine to use, and I found that it was more comfortable, it was more suited to the job, but my work ethic was not equal to the original machine that I was driving. And any day where I would get on that original machine, and I ended up back in that space. Even 2-3 years later, I sat on it for the first time, and right away, I'm back in there. So I created a tulpa. I created a thought form that was connected to me, that was attached to my, maybe the way that I sat, maybe the sound of the machine, or maybe the color of it, or just the general environment of being inside of this vehicle. It would activate and affect my consciousness in a way that allowed me to work more efficiently. Now, I did this unwittingly, unwillingly. Even though it helped me, I didn't mean to do it. But I did learn from that creating a thought form is real. So, there are things in your life, right? Like, it's the same reason that people like to have a special spot that they sit. Like, if you're a kid, I know when I was a kid, I liked to sit in the middle seat in the back of my mom's van. Even if I was the only one in there, I would go all the way to the back and sit in the middle seat because it was my seat. I was attached to it. I felt safe there because I had honestly, I probably just liked that it was a lap seat belt and I didn't have to wear the belt over my shoulder because it would always irritate my collarbone area. But so, funny little tangent there for you. So when we create a tulpa consciously, we're doing something like lighting an incense or using a specific essential oil or using a certain song or something like that to help us in, say, those things could be used in a meditation practice, right? So, like, I used to light a frankincense incense, the same one, every single time that I would meditate. And if I would smell that scent, I would immediately feel like I was meditating because I had created these programs that were activated by this sensory input. So, some people say that they create tulpas so powerful that they manifest physically or visually, at least, in the physical plane. But some people create tulpas or create thought forms that become something like a demonic presence, right? So if you have issues with addiction, if you have issues with any kind of vice, like greed, lust, arrogance, blah, 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 you name it, 13 vices or 7 deadly sins, however you like to put it. These things reinforce themselves because you have an emotional attachment to whatever you're doing when you're creating it. So when you create this thing, you are creating loosh. It's feeding off of the loosh. It's feeding off of your emotional energy. If you stop to feed it that emotional energy, it's going to sometimes sort of wake up and say, wait a minute, I'm not going to exist anymore if I don't get this energy from this person. And if you don't give it your energy, it might go somewhere else. It might go on to somebody else through the mental plane, right? Because people's minds touch. It's just like how if somebody that you are really close with or have some kind of connection with is about to call you on the phone, you might just pick that up. It's the same thing. It's the same mental string that connects you to that person, that tulpa or that thought form can then capitalize upon and move through. If that person has a similar point in their consciousness or their life that can be leveraged like you, this thing can happen. And I'm not going to say that it always happens. I'm not going to say that if you are an alcoholic that you're going to make your friend an alcoholic by being around them, but there is sort of like an epigenetic expression from the environment that you create for yourself. So if you have some kind of issue like this and you create a thought form around it, when you have a child, or if you have a child, your genetic expression is going to make them susceptible to that same thought form. So an example of this is I work at a casino, I do valet there, and I work at night on the weekends. I see all kinds of things, all kinds of people. One thing that I noticed last weekend, it was Halloween weekend, there was this guy who came out of the club that the valet is near at the casino, and he was absolutely trashed. He could barely stand. But he was there with his parents, and they were trying to get a ride, and they were having trouble getting a ride back from the place. So the mother comes up to myself and my coworkers and starts just chatting. They'd been standing there for about 45 minutes. She starts chatting and telling us that whenever her children go out, they have 4 children. Whenever her children go out, they get too drunk, they get in trouble, this and that. She doesn't understand why they all have this same problem. And then she proceeds to just gush and tell us about how she can handle her shit, so to speak, because she was one of the original ravers back in the day in Miami, and she doesn't understand why her children didn't pick that up from her, being able to handle their liquor and things like that. Now, I'm not advocating for people to drink alcohol, even though certain forms of alcohol, like hot sake or some good quality wine, especially red wine, are really good for your digestive system. And, you know, our ancestors survived off of drinking alcohol because lots of places they didn't have access to clean water, and alcohol was sanitary. But what I'm saying about this woman and the story that she told us is I could see how she created a thought form, she created a situation for somebody who didn't have the same psychological development as her to still be predisposed to doing the same things as her. So because her mind was her own, she was able to handle these things, and she could just leave it and go away from it whenever she wanted to. But her children, when they were in their late teens, started to exhibit the same sort of behaviors as her, and without that same psychological makeup that she had, they weren't able to handle it. So you could say that there was a thought form that went from the mother and father to the children and is feeding off of their energy when they, become susceptible to it when they drink alcohol. It sort of eggs them on. And this is something that a lot of people know about. In Arabic, it's called al-kul. It's the body-snatching spirit. It makes people susceptible to some demonic influence, we could say. So they created a demon, or a demon attached onto them. Now, of course, take this with a grain of salt, please, but please remember what I'm saying and try to observe it in the world, because that's the only way that we can get gnosis. See, now I'm giving you information. If you feel like you understand it, maybe it's knowledge, but knowledge without action is useless. And once you create wisdom out of that knowledge, act upon it, and use it to leverage the world around you, and really, truly see it, now you have gnosis. That's what I'm trying to give you here. Some real, true information that I have experienced and seen in the world. And maybe it's just my perspective to explain these things to myself in a sort of esoteric way. But that's why you're listening to this podcast, right? Because that's the kind of perspective you might be looking for. So, excuse me there. So, what a demon is a entity that lives in the realm of thought and the realm of spirit, or the realm of emotion, and does not get its energy from the source of all things. By contrast, an angel is something that does get its energy from the source of all things. An angel is not going to be, and I'm not talking about like Christianity or Judaism or anything like that. I'm talking about like just bare bones theory. You can apply it to whatever religion you like, but the main thing is that you want to observe these things, just like I have said. So when you think about like a demon, you might think about a haunted house, you might think about television, movies, things like that. All of these scary stories and things like that, first of all, they're playing with evil, so you definitely don't want to be impressing your consciousness with these evil stories and these evil things. But secondly, they sort of convolute the idea of what these things actually are. Most esoteric concepts are touched upon in media because it's confusing. When you experience them, they're not the same as the movie. And like we've said before, your brain cannot tell the difference between what is happening on a screen and what is happening right in front of you in your direct vicinity. So you want to guard your subconscious from information that's going to be detrimental to you, right? How many times have you seen a phone in your dream? How many times have you actually used a cell phone in your dream? Most people would answer this question with 0. Some people a few times, some people maybe all the time. I haven't ever asked that question to anybody who answered a definitive yes. You see a cell phone or a computer monitor or a television in my dreams all the time. The only times that I personally have seen some kind of technology like a cell phone screen or a television in my dream is when they're not working or they're malfunctioning. A TV is like just something in the room, or the cell phone, I'm trying to unlock it and it's just not working, or I'm trying to like send a text message or something like that. And, something that's just text on a screen, just as if you would see a piece of paper. It's just not working correctly. So actually, if you're trying to lucid dream or astral travel or get into that sort of thing, you can be cognizant of the way that technology works or does not work in the dream space. And it will show you that you're dreaming because it's an inconsistency in reality. So, right. Spaces can hold these things. I grew up in a house that was known in the neighborhood as the haunted house. My parents were the second owner of the house. The original owner built it and died inside of it, and we had all kinds of strange phenomena happen in the house. Lights would be on, you'd hear banging on the basement door at night. People would just get sick for no reason. It was just really strange. There were all kinds of things that happened. I'm going to go into that in another episode when I actually go more into detail about haunted houses. But there was something there that fed off of despair and would do anything that it could to cause fear, despair, panic, or anything like that, so they could feed off of that energy. Now, why do I say this? Because it's important for anyone, especially in the times that we're living in where the spiritual and mental and physical worlds are becoming closer and closer together, to be able to protect themselves. Any thought that you have consistently is going to be reinforcing itself. So do not have thoughts, or actively combat thoughts, I should say, or do not actively combat the thoughts, but do actively combat the thoughts that are working against you. You only want to entertain things that are moving you to where you want to go. You need to figure out where you want to go and figure out what kind of mental diet you need to have. Like we talked about in the last podcast, you need to figure out what kind of mental diet it's necessary for you to have so that you can move yourself forward in being the person and the place, being the person at the place that you need to be. So when we think about demons, we're thinking about we're gonna go into like the medieval perspective here and talk about like exorcising demons and things like that. And so we have something called the Lesser Key of Solomon, or Ars Goetia. That is something that was written in, I believe, the 17th century or 1600s, a long time ago. You can look it up yourself. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes, but a long time ago, there was a book written that had all of these demons and their seals and ways that a person could evoke them and get information out of them. People make pacts with demons all the time, and you might not think so if you're not exposed to it, but if you really listen to people, they say things that sort of allude to their dabblings in certain forms of like negative occultism or sorcery. There is a large thought form among Christians that believe that all esotericism is bad because there were people back in the day when Catholicism dominated the public consciousness of the West. Still mostly does, but there's a lot of what quote unquote you would call realism and atheism here, but as well as Eastern thought. But there was a lot of these things going around where people were trying to summon demons and things like that, and what they were actually doing was creating thought forms most of the time. I'm not going to say that they were not contacting anything, but they were definitely doing something, and you just don't want to do that, right? So when you look at something like Ars Goetia, it's Goetia. They use biblical names for entities, and they say that you could summon, like, I don't know. This is just an example. I'm just making up an example, but this is the kind of thing that's in the book. You could summon, say, like Belial, and he'll appear as a deer. After a while, if you ask him, he'll turn into a human, and he'll give you knowledge of all things past, present, and future, or all things past and present. He'll allow you to see places that are nowhere near you and understand any language on the earth. Now, what does that sound like? That sounds like the capability of a smartphone, doesn't it? Interestingly enough, magical evocation generally takes place with an implement called a scrying mirror or a magic mirror. This is a mirror or a piece of glass that is painted back. The scrying mirror is a piece of glass that is painted black on one side and hidden so that it can never touch light. And I'm not telling you how to make one, but this is just how people do it. What people do with this is look into it and see maybe one of these entities, actually, after they've done some sort of ritual. And the ritual itself is highly dependent on the mental state of the practitioner and their belief. So the mental state and the belief will create a form of energy that can be used to cause some kind of effect in their consciousness, and maybe for a moment the veil between worlds, it's really not a veil actually, because the vibration that separates realities is more of a gradient, but for the sake of consistency with the way that people understand these things, they peer through the veil, so to speak, and get in contact with these entities, right? And it could be the entity, like he's just sitting there in a waiting room waiting to be summoned or something like that, or it could be something that people have created. Now, this is what I would say is actually happening. It could be something that people have created over the years of trying to summon or utilize these things and applied so much energy to them so they actually created a tulpa, or they created a thought form that sort of just runs rampant around the world and maybe lives in a place or resides in a place where it can get the kind of energy that it needs to survive. And of course, the energy is going to be different. That's why you have demons of quote unquote of different things and angels of different things, right? Like the angel Nil is the angel of love and music and things like that, and Michael is a warrior, and Gabriel interfaces with people and has his own kind of charge, or his own ray of creation that he tends, because they're sustained by specific kinds of energy that come from people. All loosh is not created equal, although it can be transmuted by a person, by the generator, because a person, all layers of a human being are an alchemical laboratory, so to speak. So a real magician, a real alchemist uses his life or her life, her body or his body, and their entire existence as a sort of testing ground or a proving ground for the things that they're trying to create within themselves and in the universe. So that's all I'm going to go into today about this. Thank you so much for listening. Please check out my new blog post. I just started a new blog. Just go to my website, astralether.com. That's astralether.com. And on the homepage, click the blog. It'll take you to my other website, consciousevolutions.com, where I have a post all about blood and how you can improve your blood. Even that kind of is connected to the demon theory, actually, because in the beginning of the article, we have a quote from Occult Significance of Blood by Dr. Rudolf Steiner. And within that quote is another quote from, I don't really know how to say the guy's name, but it's Goethe, I think, Geothe, the famous poet, who wrote Faust, right? Because Faust is all about a blood contract with a demon, and Dr. Faust and Mephistopheles, and not abiding by universal laws when you kind of do these sort of ritual works. But that's all I'm going to go into today. Thank you so much. My name's Victor, also known as Blessed NRG or Brother Victor. Have a blessed day. Thank you.